Hello, dear students. I welcome you all on behalf of Sri Jayendra Rank Zone class. Dear students, we are in continuation of the chapter that is mineral nutrition. And in previous class, we have talked about the deficiency and toxicity symptoms of some of the minerals. Now, in today's lecture, we will going to talk about that how minerals are absorbed, how they are translocated, and why their soil act as a reservoir of soil that we are going to reservoir of elements that we are going to discuss. So first we are talking about the mechanism of absorption of elements. Whatever this mineral element there are, mineral nutrients are there, how they get uptake, how they get absorbed, that we have to understand here. So in mechanism of absorption of element, we know that the mechanism of absorption element by plant has been carried out on isolated cell, tissue or organ. It is carried out in isolated cell or a tissue or organs. Okay, in this like we can take in petri dish and we can do it experimentally in the laboratory. Okay, like this we can perform this nutrient requirement experiments. These studies revealed that the process of absorption can be demarcated into two phases. It was observed that the studies on mechanism of absorption element revealed that the absorption is demarcated into two phases, that is two things. In the first phase, that is the initial phase, there is an initial rapid uptake of iron into the free space or outer space of the cell, that is apoplast. So apoplast, we know that it consists of what? Initial uptake, it consists of a cell wall and the intercellular space, and their absorption occurs that is rapidly, and that is obviously apoplast is a passive transport, so ATP is not required, and this way the absorption occurs. Suppose this is a cell, this is another cell, this is a plasmid connection between these two. This is the cell cytoplasm, this is cell wall. Now, when the absorption is occurring through the cell wall, it is apoplast. Okay, so that is through the cell wall, then it is apoplast. So the uptake in the first phase involves the initial rapid uptake into the outer free space that comprises a cell wall and intercellular spaces. The outer space of cell or a free space means cell wall and intercellular space. Now, obviously, this is a passive process, and in this, there is ATP is not required. That you should remember. In this apoplast, ATP is not required. Whereas in the second phase, the ions are taken in slowly into the inner space, the symplast of the cell or the cytoplasm of the cell. And that space is enclosed by the plasma membrane, we call it a symplast. Now, the passive movement of ions symplast can be both passive and active. Usually symplast is active, plus symplast of the cell, it can be passive or active, and passive and active actually. And the passive movement of ions occurs into the apoplast of the cell along the concentration gradient, usually through the ion channels. Ion channels are nothing but here they are the transmembrane channel through which this passive transport happens. Okay. Now, the transmembrane protein function as a selective pores. Okay, transmembrane function as a selective pores, and through which this they are helping here. So it is a selective process. And like this, the particularly ions are taken up and taken out. Okay, and this way the proteins play a role in the, which are present in the membrane in the active uptake. And here ATP is required for the functionality of the pump. So here in symplast, second phase, ATP are closed. Now the entry and exit of ions into the symplast against the concentration gradient required expenditure of metabolic energy, that is in the form of ATP, that is called active process. And here the movement of ion takes place, that is known as flux. And if the inward movement of ions takes place into the cell, it is known as influx. And if the outward movement occurs of the ions, that is known as efflux. You can see this is the movement of English. K plus is going inside, then it is an influx. K plus going outside, then it is a efflux. So these are the two main phases in which the particularly we can say the absorption occur. So plant absorb mineral nutrient by the active or passive way. So plants obtain carbon and most of their oxygen from the CO2 in the atmosphere. However, the remaining nutrient requirement obtained from minerals and water for hydrogen in the soil. So from soil they can be absorbed active or passive. So what we understood? Minerals can be absorbed passively and actively, but mostly through active absorption. So the question is, why all minerals cannot be passively absorbed by the root? Why all minerals cannot be passively absorbed by the roots? So they are mainly absorbed or why they are absorbed by the active transport. So if you answer this question, then it is that first, minerals are present in soil as charged particles, or we can say ions. So this cannot move passively across cell membrane, which cannot move across cell membrane passively. And second, concentration of mineral in soil is usually lower than the concentration of minerals in root. Therefore, most minerals must enter the root by active absorption into the cytoplasm of the epidermal cell. Although some ions also move into the epidermal cells passively, but majority are absorbed through actively. Or we can write question, we can frame as why mostly minerals show active absorption. Such type of question we can ask. Now, after this particularly absorption and the particularly why they are actively absorbed into the epidermal cells, we have understood that are two methods, that is the passive absorption and the active absorption. So how this take place, that we have to understand. So we have to understand the methods of mineral absorption. In methods of mineral absorption, it is by a passive absorption and active absorption. If we talk about the first one, that is passive absorption, then it occurs without expenditure of energy, without use of ATP, and it is by number one, either diffusion, that is according to this method, minerals may diffuse into the root cell from the soil solution, or by mass flow. By mass flow, according to this method, minerals move along with the bulk flow of water. Here, minerals move along with bulk flow of water under the high rate of transpiration. So when transpiration occurs, transpiration pool develops. We have discussed in the previous chapter. So along with the transpiration pool, the water will move the upward side, and along with this particularly due to the transpiration pool, the water is absorbed by the passively, and along with this passive bulk flow, the minerals are getting absorbed in the passive absorption. The another is the active absorption. In active absorption, the in this method, the ions move from less concentrated soil solution to more concentrated cell cell. Okay, so here minerals move from soil solution to cell cell through the use of ATP. And here specific proteins in the membrane in the root hair actively pump ions into from the soil into the cytoplasm. So here specific protein in membranes of root hair in membranes of root hair cell actively pump ions from the soil into the cytoplasm of epidermal cell. And like all cell, epidermals have many transport protein embedded in their plasma membrane. They let some solids to cross the membrane, but not the others. When the absorption continues, the minerals move from epidermal cell to the cortex, and then cortex to the endodermis. And endodermis have also some transport proteins. So we remember transport proteins of endodermal cells means endodermis cells are control points. They are control points, and where the plant adjusts the quantity and type of solute that reach the xylem. So these proteins in the endodermal cell membrane, they are acting as a control point and they are controlling the quantity, adjusting the quantity and type of solute. We remember what? The quantity and the type of solute that reach the xylem. And specifically in root endodermis, if we talk, the root endodermis, because of layer of suberin, has the ability to actively transport proteins, to actively transport ions in one direction only. Okay, and that is obviously due to this endodermis. So this is the what how the particular absorption take place. And if we talk about the MCQ, the inward movement into the cell, it is known as, obviously we have discussed, it is influx. Now after this, if we talk about the translocation of the solutes and the soil act as a reservoir of essential element, then first we discuss the translocation of the solutes. Whatever the solute have reached the xylem of the root from the epidermis or from the soil through the epidermis, cortex, endodermis, and ultimately to the xylem. Then after reaching xylem, how the minerals or salts or solutes are getting translocated to the different parts of the plant. So mineral salts are translocated through the xylem along with the ascending stream of water. Means whatever the water is moving upward, along with the water, these minerals are translocated through the xylem. And here, which is pulled up through the plant by a transpiration pool. So transpiration pool develop on the surface. From the surface, transpiration occur and they develop a transpiration pool through which they particularly are translocated along with the water. So the xylem is playing a role in their transport. So analysis of the xylem set also shows that the presence of mineral salt in it and the reuse of radioactive isotopes of the mineral elements also substantiate the view that they are transported through xylem. So now it is clear that the ions which have reached the xylem through either active or passive transport or other combination two, they are further transported up the stem to all parts of the plant through the transpiration stream through the xylem. Okay, and now these minerals have certain areas there is a requirement or there is a particularly we can say a need. So these are known as chief sinks. So chief sinks, if you talk for mineral element where there is a requirement are number one growing regions of plant. There is a requirement. So this is chief sink and growing region of plant such as apical and lateral meristem. Meristem. Apart from this, young leaves also need mineral element. Then developing flowers, fruits, seeds, and storage organ. Okay, this all act as a chief sink. When minerals ions are translocated and they are released and the cell in the leaf, that is through the vein ending. So it is known that the unloading of mineral ions occur at the fine vein endings through diffusion and active uptake and active uptake by cells of zinc. So zinc is what? Where there is a requirement that cells. So from the suppose this is the leaf and this is the veins. This is the vein endings and these are the cells which require. So from this vein endings it will be released by the diffusion, but the cells will uptake by the active transport. Now these minerals are also frequently remobilized, particularly from the older sandstone parts. Older dying leaves expose much of their mineral content to the younger leaves. Similarly, before leaf fall in deciduous plants, minerals are removed to other plant part. And we have already studied that the mobile elements are the phosphorus, sulfur, nitrogen, potassium, and some of the immobile elements are the calcium and sulfur that we have already discussed. Now, after this, when translocation occurred, in this, when we have studied the xylem sap, it is known that the analysis of xylem exudates analysis of xylem exudates shows that it shows that sum of nitrogen, number one, sum of nitrogen travel as inorganic ions inorganic ions and and much of it is carried in the organic form as amino acid and related compounds. So some of nitrogen travel as inorganic ion and much of it is carried out around. So majority is carried out in the organic form, not in the inorganic form. And it is also like amino acid and compounds. But similarly, small amount of phosphorus and sulfur are carried as small amount of phosphorus and sulfur are carried as organic compounds. In addition, okay, so small amount of phosphorus sulfur are carried out as organic and majority transport of phosphorus and sulfur occur as a what? Inorganic compounds. Apart from this, in addition, small amount of exchange of material does take place between xylem and phloem. So from this it is concluded that it is not that we can clearly make a distinction and say categorically that xylem transport only inorganic nutrients while phloem transport only organic material, which is it was traditionally believed. So it is not clearly distinction that the xylem transport inorganic ions and the phloem transport organic ions. Okay, so that is what particularly about the translocation. Now, after translocation, next we are going to understand the soil, which is acting as a reservoir of essential element. And when we talk about the soil, the majority of nutrients that are essential for the growth and development of the plant, they become available to the roots of the plant due to the weathering and breakdown of the rock. So when weathering and breakdown of rock occur, the minerals will get released and that are absorbed by the plant. So because of it is acting as soil acting as a reservoir. And the process, this weathering process enrich the soil with the dissolved ions. So this is the breakdown, this is the weathering, and it enrich the soil with the dissolved ions and inorganic salts. Now, since they are derived from the rock material or rock minerals, the role in plant nutrition is referred as a mineral nutrition. Why? Because they are developed from the rock minerals. Okay, so that is known as mineral nutrition. Now, soil consists of wide variety of substances, obviously, and the soil play a several role as well. So, soil not only suppose apply mineral but also harbor a nitrogen fixing bacteria, other microbes, hold water, all these things. So soil play several important roles, like it supply minerals and harbors nitrogen fixing, means have a nitrogen fixing bacteria. They have other microbes also. They hold water, that is a reservoir of water for plants. They supplies air to the root and also act as a matrix that stabilizes the plant. It also act as a matrix. Okay, so these are the important roles of the soil. Okay, so for all this it is involved. Now, since deficiency of essential element affect the crop yield, there is often a need of supplying minerals to the fertilizers. And this fertilizers which are need to be provided that are usually micronutrient. So both macronutrient and micronutrient form the components of the fertilizer and are applied as per need. But majority micronutrient are need to be applied regularly. Now in this, be remember that in terrestrial habitat, a soil is the site of decomposition, and decomposition a process that recycle minerals from the detritus. Since deficiency of essential element affect the crop, we have discussed that both macro and micronutrient act as a particularly applied in the fertilizers. So because of this, soil has so many roles and variety of substances it have, and it is obtained from the particularly minerals are obtained from the rock. Because of this, we call it as a reservoir of the essential element. So minerals are translocated through, obviously they are translocated through the xylem. Fertilizer supplied as a micronutrient, they obviously a copper. Okay, because nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur are macronutrient. Apoplast and symplast movement of elements are, apoplast is passive and symplast is active. Okay, so this is all about what particularly how the minerals are absorbed, how they are translocated, and why soil acting is a reservoir of mineral element. So now all things about the mineral nutrition we have discussed. Now only we are remaining with the nitrogen metabolism that we will discuss in the separate lecture. Okay, I hope you understood. Thank you everyone.